In the most restrictive housing units across the United States prison system, silence is not incidental. It is structured. These units are commonly referred to as special housing units, or SHU, and in some state systems as administrative segregation or security housing units. Their design is consistent across jurisdictions. Solid doors, limited visibility, minimal human contact. The Federal Bureau of Prisons defines these units as spaces for inmates who require separation from the general population for administrative or disciplinary reasons. Placement can result from rule violations, ongoing investigations, or perceived threats to institutional order. Cells are typically between 60 and 80 square feet. Furnishings are fixed. A concrete platform serves as a bed. A combined sink and toilet unit is bolted into the wall. Lighting is controlled externally and often remains on for extended periods. According to reports from the U.S. Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General, inmates in these units may spend between 22 and 24 hours per day inside their cells. Movement is tightly regulated. When individuals leave their cells, it is usually alone, under escort, and often in restraints. Human interaction is reduced to necessity. Meals are delivered through a slot in the door. Communication with staff is brief and functional. Verbal exchanges between inmates occur through walls or doors, often distorted by the structure itself. The absence of direct contact is not incidental. It is part of the design. Research published by the National Institute of Justice and independent academic institutions has documented the effects of prolonged isolation in correctional environments. These findings consistently describe a pattern: sensory restriction, limited social interaction, and enforced routine. Inmates in these conditions have reported difficulty concentrating, disruptions in sleep patterns, and increased sensitivity to external stimuli. These observations are documented in clinical assessments conducted within correctional systems and reviewed in federal oversight reports. The structure of the environment plays a central role. There are no clocks in many of these cells. Natural light, when present, is filtered through narrow or frosted windows. Time becomes measured through routine rather than observation. Meal delivery, security checks, occasional movement. In this environment, attention shifts. Without external stimulation, individuals often begin to observe patterns that would otherwise go unnoticed. The timing of footsteps in the corridor, the sequence of door openings, the duration between institutional activities. Correctional literature and documented inmate accounts have described how some individuals adapt by focusing on these details, not as a strategy of defiance, but as a method of orientation. A report by the American Civil Liberties Union, examining long-term segregation practices, noted that individuals frequently attempt to impose structure where little exists. This includes tracking time, memorizing routines, and observing institutional behavior with precision. In federal court cases involving prolonged solitary confinement, such as those reviewed in Ashker v. Governor of California, testimony included descriptions of inmates developing heightened awareness of their surroundings. These accounts were entered into the record as part of broader legal challenges to extended isolation practices. The environment encourages observation. Every movement in the corridor is audible. Metal doors amplify sound. Keys, footsteps, distant voices, they carry through the unit with consistency. Over time, patterns emerge. Correctional officers conduct regular rounds. These rounds are documented, timed, and subject to internal policy. Inmates, confined to their cells, are positioned to hear and sometimes see fragments of these routines. This is not presented as an investigative role. It is a byproduct of confinement. In some documented cases, inmates have used these observations to understand institutional processes. Legal filings and investigative journalism have noted instances where individuals in segregation became aware of procedural inconsistencies, timing irregularities, or deviations from standard operating procedures. These observations have occasionally been referenced in grievances, appeals, or legal correspondence. Access to information within these units is limited, but not absent. Inmates may receive legal documents, institutional handbooks, and, in some cases, reading materials. The Federal Bureau of Prisons allows for limited property, subject to approval. Legal work is one of the few structured activities available. Within this framework, attention to detail becomes significant. Court records indicate that some inmates, particularly those engaged in ongoing legal cases, spend extended periods reviewing documents, cross-referencing timelines, and preparing filings. These activities are conducted within the constraints of the cell, often without direct assistance. The environment does not facilitate investigation in the traditional sense. There are no interviews, no access to external databases, no fieldwork. What exists is observation, repetition, memory. A 2015 report by the Vera Institute of Justice on segregation practices highlighted that individuals in isolated housing often rely on internal cognitive strategies to maintain mental stability. This includes organizing information, recalling sequences, and constructing routines. In this context, the boundary between coping mechanism and analytical process can become indistinct. Institutional control remains constant. Surveillance is continuous. Movements are logged. Interactions are recorded. The structure is designed to limit autonomy and maintain order. Within that structure, however, small consistencies persist. The timing of a meal, the sequence of a security check, the rhythm of a corridor. These are not anomalies. They are the framework of the environment. And for those confined within it, they are often the only available data. The unit remains quiet. The lights do not change.
Movement inside a high-security prison is not continuous. It is scheduled, documented, and controlled. In restricted housing units, movement is typically conducted on an individual basis. Each action is authorized. Each step is supervised. The Federal Bureau of Prisons outlines specific procedures for inmate movement in high-security environments. These procedures include restraints, escorts, and pre-cleared routes. Movement logs are maintained, noting the time, purpose, and personnel involved. For inmates, these moments of movement are limited but consistent. A transfer to a shower, a legal visit, a medical appointment. Each instance follows a sequence. Doors open in a fixed order. Commands are issued in a consistent tone. Restraints are applied and removed according to protocol. Officers position themselves in predictable locations relative to the inmate. These sequences are not concealed. They are operational necessities. Over time, individuals confined within these units are exposed to repeated versions of the same process. The structure does not change frequently. Adjustments are documented and implemented through formal channels. This consistency creates a visible pattern. Reports from correctional oversight bodies, including the Office of the Inspector General, have noted that institutional routines are designed to reduce unpredictability. Standardization is a core principle in maintaining order within high-security facilities. For staff, this reduces risk. For inmates, it establishes a fixed environment. Within this environment, observation continues. An inmate positioned inside a cell may not see the entire movement process, but fragments are available. The sound of restraints being secured. The timing between door openings. The number of officers present. These fragments repeat. Academic studies examining inmate behavior in restrictive housing, including research published in the journal Criminal Justice and Behavior, have documented that individuals often become attuned to these operational details. The process is not formalized. It emerges through exposure. Patterns are identified through repetition. In some documented cases, inmates have used this awareness in administrative processes. Grievance filings, which are part of formal prison procedure, occasionally reference specific times, sequences, or deviations from standard practice. These references are not speculative. They are based on observed routine. The Bureau of Prisons Administrative Remedy Program allows inmates to submit formal complaints regarding institutional conditions or staff conduct. These submissions often include detailed descriptions of events, including timing and sequence. Accuracy is essential. Without access to external verification tools, individuals rely on memory and observation. Details are reconstructed based on repeated exposure to the same processes. Legal case records have shown that in certain instances, inmate-submitted documentation has aligned with institutional logs. These alignments are assessed through internal review or judicial proceedings. This does not indicate investigative authority. It reflects sustained observation within a fixed system. Movement procedures also reveal the structure of control. The number of staff involved in an escort. The positioning of officers relative to the inmate. The use of restraints. These elements are standardized across facilities, with minor variations depending on security level and institutional policy. Training manuals for correctional officers, including those used by federal and state systems, emphasize consistency in these procedures. Deviation is discouraged unless required by circumstance. From within a cell, consistency becomes measurable. The interval between movements, the duration of an escort, the frequency of specific activities. These intervals form a timeline. Inmates have limited tools for tracking time. In some units, clocks are not visible. Personal timekeeping devices are restricted. As a result, time is often estimated through institutional activity. A meal arrives. A round is conducted. A movement occurs. Each event marks a point in the day. Over extended periods, these points accumulate into a structured understanding of time. Research conducted by the Vera Institute of Justice has highlighted that individuals in restrictive housing often develop internal systems for tracking daily routines. These systems are not formally recorded but are described in interviews and psychological assessments. They serve multiple purposes: orientation, stability, continuity, and in some cases, documentation. In federal court filings, particularly those involving conditions of confinement, inmate declarations have included detailed accounts of daily routines. These accounts are sometimes corroborated by institutional records during legal review. The process is methodical. Observation, retention, reconstruction. There is no direct access to the broader system. Inmates do not see scheduling documents. They do not review staffing assignments. They do not access movement logs. What they experience is the visible output of those systems. Doors opening, officers moving, procedures repeating. This output remains consistent unless disrupted. When disruptions occur, they are noticeable. A delay in movement, a change in sequence, an unexpected presence. Such deviations are documented internally by staff. They may also be noted by inmates, based on prior observation. In correctional environments, deviation is not inherently significant. It may result from routine operational adjustments. However, within a controlled and repetitive system, even minor changes are apparent. The environment does not conceal its structure. It enforces it. And within that enforcement, patterns persist. For individuals confined to a single space, these patterns are among the few accessible forms of information. They are not complete. They are not comprehensive. But they are consistent. The corridor returns to stillness. Doors close in sequence. Footsteps recede. The structure remains in place, unchanged, repeating. Within restricted housing units, access to the outside world is limited, but not entirely removed. One of the few formal channels available to inmates is the administrative remedy process. In the federal system, this process is governed by established policy. It allows individuals to submit written complaints regarding conditions of confinement, staff conduct, or procedural violations. The process is structured. An initial filing is submitted at the institutional level. If denied, it may be appealed to a regional office. A final appeal can be directed to the central office of the Bureau of Prisons. Each step requires documentation. Deadlines are enforced. Formats are prescribed. Responses are issued in writing. For inmates in segregation, this process often becomes a primary point of engagement with the institution. Access to writing materials is regulated but permitted. Paper, envelopes, and limited writing instruments are typically issued upon request. Legal correspondence is recognized as protected activity under federal policy. In this environment, documentation becomes central. Without direct communication or access to external verification, written records serve as the primary method of preserving information. Dates, times, and sequences are recorded manually. This practice is reflected in legal filings. Federal court cases involving prison conditions frequently include handwritten declarations from inmates. These documents often contain detailed timelines, descriptions of events, and references to institutional procedures. In Farmer v. Brennan, a case reviewed by the United States Supreme Court, the importance of documented inmate testimony was central to evaluating claims of deliberate indifference. While the case addressed specific legal standards, it also demonstrated the role of inmate-generated records in judicial review. Documentation is not limited to grievances. Inmates engaged in legal proceedings, including appeals or civil rights actions, may prepare motions, affidavits, and supporting materials from within their cells. These documents are often drafted without direct legal assistance, relying on available resources. Access to legal materials varies. Some facilities provide limited access to law libraries, either through physical visits or a request-based system where materials are delivered to the inmate. The Federal Bureau of Prisons outlines these provisions in policy statements, though availability can differ depending on security level and operational constraints. In segregation, access is often indirect. Requests are submitted in writing. Materials are delivered and retrieved through staff. Time with these materials is finite and scheduled. Within these constraints, information is processed manually. Legal documents are read, reread, and annotated. References are cross-checked against memory and prior notes. There are no digital tools. No search functions. No external databases. The process is slow. Each piece of information must be located, understood, and integrated without assistance. Academic research on incarcerated individuals engaged in self-representation, including studies published in the Harvard Civil Rights Civil Liberties Law Review, has noted that some inmates develop detailed familiarity with procedural rules and institutional policies. This familiarity is often acquired through repeated interaction with the legal system and sustained exposure to documentation. It is not formal training. It is accumulation. In certain cases, investigative journalism has documented instances where inmates identified inconsistencies in institutional responses. These inconsistencies, when raised through formal channels, have led to internal reviews or external scrutiny. Such outcomes are not common. Most filings are resolved within the administrative framework, often without escalation. However, the process itself remains available. Each submission generates a response. Each response becomes part of a record. Over time, these records form a sequence. An initial complaint, a denial, an appeal, a subsequent denial. The language is standardized. The format is consistent. For inmates, this consistency provides a structure within which information can be organized. Dates are tracked. Responses are compared. Patterns are noted. This does not constitute investigation in the conventional sense. There are no interviews. No direct evidence collection. No independent verification. What exists is a closed loop of documentation. Input and response. Claim and review. Within this loop, attention to detail becomes critical. A missed deadline can terminate a claim. An incomplete form can result in rejection. Precision is required at each stage. Institutional policies are explicit on these requirements. The Bureau of Prisons Program Statement on Administrative Remedy Procedures outlines the necessary steps, including timeframes, content standards, and submission protocols. These guidelines are accessible to inmates, though interpretation often relies on individual effort. In segregation, that effort occurs in isolation. There is no collaborative review. No shared workspace. Each document is prepared alone. This isolation shapes the process. Errors must be identified internally. Revisions are made without feedback. Understanding develops through repetition. Over extended periods, some individuals become proficient in navigating these procedures. Court records reflect this. In cases involving pro se litigants, individuals representing themselves, judicial opinions occasionally note the level of detail and organization present in inmate filings. These observations are part of the legal record. They do not imply endorsement. They reflect the content submitted. The administrative system remains controlled. All submissions are reviewed by staff. Responses are issued according to policy. Outcomes are determined within the institutional framework. There is no external oversight at the initial stages. Only upon escalation to higher levels or entry into the federal court system does independent review occur. Even then, access is limited. Proceedings are conducted through written submissions. Physical presence in court is rare for incarcerated individuals. The process remains mediated by documentation. Paper moves where people cannot. Within a confined space, the act of writing becomes a method of engagement. Not with the outside world directly, but with the system that governs the environment. Each page represents an attempt to record, to question, or to respond. The cell remains unchanged. The desk holds the same materials. Inside the structure of a prison, most actions leave a record. Movement is logged. Incidents are documented. Requests are filed, reviewed, and answered. The system is built on documentation. For individuals in restrictive housing, access to that system is limited to what can be written, submitted, and returned. There are no direct conversations with decision makers. No immediate clarifications. Only the exchange of documents. This exchange defines the boundary of interaction. Over time, the accumulation of records forms a parallel version of events. An inmate submits a grievance. The institution responds. An appeal is filed. Another response follows. Each document is dated. Each response is archived. Together, they create a sequence that exists independently of the physical environment. Federal oversight reports, including those issued by the Department of Justice, have consistently emphasized the role of documentation in maintaining accountability within correctional systems. Records are used to verify compliance, review conduct, and assess institutional practices. But records are not neutral in their creation. They are shaped by policy, by format, by the limits of what can be included and what cannot. In segregation, where observation replaces interaction, the act of documenting becomes a method of preserving what would otherwise pass without acknowledgement. A delayed response, a missed procedure, a deviation from routine. When written, these moments enter the system. When not written, they do not exist beyond memory. Court proceedings involving prison conditions often rely on this distinction. Judges review written submissions. Timelines are reconstructed from documented evidence. Institutional logs are compared with inmate declarations. Where alignment exists, it is noted. Where discrepancies appear, they are examined within the constraints of available records. This process does not reconstruct the full reality of confinement. It reconstructs what has been preserved. For inmates, the challenge is structural. There is no guarantee that a submission will alter conditions. No assurance that a response will address the issue raised. But the process itself remains accessible, repeatable, bound by rules that do not change frequently. In this environment, persistence becomes procedural. A filing is completed. A deadline is met. A response is received. Then the cycle begins again. Over extended periods, this repetition produces a documented presence. Not visible in the corridor. Not audible through the walls. But present within the system that governs the institution. Some cases extend beyond that system. Civil rights litigation, reviewed in federal courts, occasionally originates from within segregation units. These cases are built on accumulated records, grievances, appeals, declarations. They move slowly. Months become years. Outcomes vary. But the foundation remains the same. Written observation. Structured submission. Recorded response. The physical environment does not reflect these processes. The cell remains unchanged. The corridor continues its routine. Doors open and close according to schedule. Inside, the conditions are static. Outside, the record evolves. This separation is consistent across facilities. What is lived and what is documented are not always identical. But only one is preserved. In the end, the system does not remember individuals through presence. It remembers them through files, through timestamps, through written accounts that meet the requirements of format and procedure. Everything else remains unrecorded, unverified, absent from the official record. The lights in the unit do not dim. The routine does not pause. The structure continues as designed. And within it, the only trace of resistance, observation, or inquiry is what has been written, submitted, and accepted into the system. Nothing more. Nothing beyond the record. If you found this examination valuable, you can continue the conversation by sharing your perspective, engaging with the material, or following for further documented explorations into institutional systems and confinement.